thank you so much for this opportunity to be talking about settlement ceramics and social practices in urban and rural Bronze Age Nubia. And as Kasia just said, I will present mostly some results of our current ERC project. What I'm trying to do in the next roughly 1 hour is that I will start with an introduction, so a little bit of the state of the art about ceramics in New Kingdom Nubia. Then I will introduce the Diverse Nile project. I will then focus on one case study that is falling into what we can call urban New Kingdom Nubia, the city of Sai Island. We then move to the more rural place with Attab West 001 as a case study. And I will finish off with some thoughts about, what could lead us towards a better understanding of social practices in colonial Nubia. So I think most of us are well aware that Egypt and Nubia can be described with some topographical and geological differences. That there are also partly different lifestyles, peasants, pastoralists, nomads, semi-nomads, etc. But what we also very well know, especially with recent research, is that we have complex cultural encounters, including cultural mixing and intermingling and technology exchange. Those cultural encounters in 2 ways, they are already traceable in pre-dynastic times, but they are especially evident in the late Bronze Age in the New Kingdom era. And this is also thanks to recent fieldwork in Egyptian colonial towns in New Kingdom Nubia. So because of this new fieldwork, we can say that our present knowledge of the pottery in late Bronze Age Nubia is much advanced compared to what we, for example, had in the 1990s. So in the last decades, both in Egypt and Nubia, much progress was done, for example, at Elephantine, but also at other places. And I just show you as one example, 2 very nice monographs that were just published last year. One is dedicated to a cemetery or 2 cemeteries by Valentina Gasparini, but nevertheless, since Attab West also holds a major town, this material is of huge interest also if you study settlements. And a very important work is by Philippe Roufieux about Dukigel and the close interaction between Kerma, Nubians, and Egyptians. So in general, since 2007, there was a new phase of intense research in New Kingdom Nubia. We can trace this with important work at Attab West, but also Sai Island, Sesibi, Tombos, Dukigel, and other sites. I will focus on Sai, not only because I have worked there, but also because it holds much potential if we discuss the 18th dynasty. It has really a continuous use from the very early 18th dynasty all the way to the late 18th dynasty. And what we begin to understand is comparable to what people a little bit earlier already observed for Middle Kingdom Nubia. And this is the importance of regionality, the importance of regional aspects of local production, of complex intermingling. And why we also have a better present understanding of pottery in late Bronze Age Nubia is also because we have more archaeometric studies and a better understanding in this respect. And we also introduced experimental archaeology, several of the missions working in New Kingdom Nubia. But of course, if we gain more knowledge, it also gets more complicated. So the previous simplistic approach that in Middle Kingdom Nubia, in New Kingdom Nubia, we have a clear division when it comes to pottery in the wheel-made pottery and in the handmade pottery, let's say Egyptian style and Nubian style, like you can see here in the seminal work by Stuart Tyson Smith, is of course not any longer working. It's much more complicated. There are more categories. There are more things than just wheel-made pottery, than just handmade, etc., etc. And what the current state of the art for New Kingdom Nubia also is that we understand Nubian pottery as integral part of the material culture, also at colonial sites, and I will talk about Sai, but of course also at other sites. And I will also give you another case study for this. And that it's more complicated is, of course, the result of those interactions, influences that I already mentioned. So the recent advances and the new fieldwork at those New Kingdom sites have really introduced the cultural entanglement approach to New Kingdom Nubia, but this approach was heavily relying on work at central sites. So at the new excavations that I just mentioned, I just highlight Sai Island again. This, of course, holds a methodological problem because it's really an elite bias. Those are state-built foundations, so we have a kind of a focus on those elite places. And when I was working on Sai, I was beginning to ask myself, okay, but what's really between those major sites that we begin to understand much better? So it was clear that we still have a lack of data because we left the periphery unaddressed. And also because there is a certain focus on funerary remains. This holds true for most of Nubia, but also for New Kingdom Nubia. Yeah, and this is where the ERC Diverse Nile project steps in. Within the Munich University Attab West survey concession, which you can see here on the map. It's located just north of Amara West and Sai Island, south of the Dal Cataract. Within this research concession, we launched the project in 2020 with a clear focus on Bronze Age and cultural diversity. So we started on purpose with some open questions from my previous ERC project, focusing on Sai Island, Elephantine, and Abydos in Egypt. And you can really call this research concession something like the hinterland of Sai and Amara, and it's also kind of a borderscape since it's located south of the Dal Cataract and south of the Batn el Haga, as you can hopefully nicely see on the map. So what our aim from the beginning was that I introduced the concept of contact space biography as the main methodological conceptual concept for the Diverse Nile project. So I took what Stockhammer and Atanasov described as contact spaces, especially as social spaces. And you have here the quote on the slide: social spaces where human actors meet, perceive, and constitute otherness. So it's really about this meeting, perceiving, and constituting. And this context space approach was kind of a little bit hanging loosely in the air and was not combined with a spatial approach. And this is what I then tried for our project is, I did this in combining context spaces with the landscape biography approach, following especially Colin and Rennes. So this is what I then called context space biography, and this is what we really aim for. We are doing this in combination with other conceptual approaches, especially with the objectscape approach, which was most recently described by Pitts and Verslois. And with this, we mean that the regionality of material culture really has an impact of societal formations. And I hope that in my lecture today, I can show you a little bit what I mean with this. So in a nutshell, we really aim with the Diverse Nile project to reconstruct social spaces and to provide alternatives to center-oriented narratives of New Kingdom Nubia. So it's all about cultural diversity and contact spaces. And I just show you here one of our recent publications that a volume that I edited together with Renan Lemos, where we were focusing on landscape and resource management in Bronze Age Nubia. And this is relevant because in this volume, we tried to address the agency of material culture, the relevance of technologies, but also gold working as one of the major activities that is really important in the Middle Nile during the New Kingdom, but also before the New Kingdom in Kerma times. And I told you already that we are working in this hinterland. You could also call it periphery, but really periphery just in terms of a spatial thing. And we want to show how relevant those marginal areas, those peripheries can really be when it comes to trade networks. And I will also come back to this today. So in general, we do have really diverse social contexts within Nubia and different local communities. This is a complex data set we have to deal with, but it will really allow us to come up with new and more inclusive narratives about the Middle Nile. And we hope that this volume is already a kind of a first step towards this. I told you already that one of our main foci is material culture. So we are conducting a large amount of archaeometric analysis, also for our pottery. I will not talk about the details here, but I just wanted to mention that we have now more than 600 ceramic samples from the Muaf concession, from the Sai Island area, from Dukigel and Attab West, thanks to kind of cooperations with colleagues. And our main aim when we conduct those archaeometric analysis are, of course, that we want to analyze and differentiate clay raw materials, but especially the ceramic technologies. So really we want to focus on the complete chain operatoires of the pottery we encounter. And we are doing this at various sites, at various time periods. And for this, the Muaf concession area is just wonderful. And the perfect thing is that we can do this with this hinterland in comparison to the urban sites, because we have access to Sai data, to Dukigel, and to Attab West. And I'm, of course, not doing all of this alone, but most of the work is actually conducted by Julia Derkole, by Johannes Sterber, Albert Gilg, and Fabian Delefant. Yeah, and with this, not too short, but with this introduction, let's move to Sai Island. Sai Island during the New Kingdom. Sai is one of the most important New Kingdom sites. It's located between the second and the third cataract. It's a large Nile island. And on the eastern part of the island, there is the New Kingdom town. So we have been excavating for the ERC Across Borders project in this fortified town. It's something that we call a temple town, where we do have a stone temple and various different parts of the city. As you can see, the southern part is quite well understood and was excavated already in the 1970s. But the remaining part of the town still posed several questions and was almost unexcavated. And today, I will only focus on the western part that you can see here with the town wall, where we encountered the town wall of the New Kingdom temple town, and a little bit on the eastern part. The main phasing and all the different buildings we were finding there are already published. And today, I will just focus on the pottery and why it's relevant to compare it with other sites. Very briefly on material and methods for the New Kingdom pottery from Sai, we did find huge amounts from the town. So we really had hundreds and hundreds of baskets. What is important to stress, and I will show you this again in another slide, is that it was not only New Kingdom material. So especially in the surface layers, we had a lot of post-New Kingdom material. And this is, of course, from the methodological point of view, a little bit of a challenge. The Across Borders project was focusing on the 18th dynasty and the Ramesside remains. And we did this with standard ceramic analysis, but also with scientific analysis. I just want to mention optical microscopy, instrumental neutron activation analysis, but also recently XRD, Raman spectroscopy, and organic residue analysis. Yeah, and on this slide, I just brought you two contexts that are very typical for surface contexts on Sai. So as you can see here, this is mostly medieval material, and here you have very nice 18th dynasty mixed again with medieval material. And in some cases, it was really not always easy to differentiate very, very clearly. Of course, we did have some stratigraphic units and stratigraphic sequences on Sai Island. All of this is already published in the Across Borders 2 volume, so I will not go into detail here, but in order to understand the pottery processing, I think it's really relevant to stress that it was, in most cases, really kind of backfillings and fills of New Kingdom buildings that have been used also in later times, or at least in general, the town has been used in later times. Yeah, what you normally start with when you work with settlement material is, of course, that you look on your at your fabrics and wares. And I just show you one context from South1 West, from the Western sector, with this one context had more than 10,000 single shirts. And the distribution of the fabric groups is shown in this table and also in this diagram. And most significant is that although we do have a large variety of fabrics, like we do have Egyptian marl clays that have been imported from Egypt, we have Egyptian mixed clays that also have been imported from Egypt, we have Levantine amphora, which also have been imported probably via Egypt. Then we do have a lot of Nile clays. So I adapted the Vienna system for the New Kingdom material from Sai with some local variations. And then, of course, we have Nubian material. I will come back to the Nubian material a little bit later. But what you can see in the numbers, and especially here on the graph, is that most of the material is Nile clay. It's a Nile B2 and a Nile C2. So this is in general very, very typical for settlement pottery, also in Egypt, but especially at the New Kingdom temple towns that we find in Nubia. If you have a closer look on the Nile clays, it is clear that we do have local Nubian Nile clays. They can be quite fine with black-topped variants. They can be quite coarse with basketry impressed variations, with impressed design. And we also think that some of the Nubian stuff is actually more regional, like not really local to Sai and the immediate surroundings, but probably coming from further north and partly also from other regions. The same holds true for the Egyptian Nile clays. So we have local Egyptian Nile clays that were most likely produced at the spot. We do have evidence for unfired pottery sherds and for wasters. So we know that pottery was produced on Sai. And we do have Egyptian imports. And this is interesting that we do have Nile clays that have been imported. It's, of course, logical that you import nice stuff like blue painted material, especially as jars and as amphora. But it's a little bit more unusual that we had a quite large amount of imported cooking pots made in Nile clay. And those imported Egyptian cooking pots were investigated by Johannes Sterber and Julia Derkole, especially with instrumental neutron activation analysis, but also with regarding the petrography and everything. And what you can see on this nice green dots that we labeled here as real Egyptian are actually all the cooking pots. So the cooking pots show the different chemistry than the Nubian style and Egyptian style. And this is why we also think it's really imported from Egypt. Petrographically, those imported cooking pots fit perfectly to what we have at Elephantine, at the Egyptian border, in the New Kingdom. Just very briefly, Julia Derkole did a meticulous job about petrography, and she described the Egyptian style, Nile clays, marl clays, imported wares, but also the Nubian fabrics. I mentioned already the chemistry, the instrumental Newton activation analysis. Johannes Sterber and Julia Derkole could show that there are certain differences between Nubian and Egyptian style. At the moment, we think that it is very likely that for most of the material, the same raw material was used. So they used the same clay source. But then during the manufacturing technique, especially if it comes to tempering, preparing the clay, there were certain differences. And this again stresses that our approach, considering the complete chain operatoire, is really something essential. What you can see here is that the Egyptian style samples have a little bit more potassium and the Nubian style a little bit less. It does not seem to be a result from the raw material, but really probably more with tempering, preparing, and stuff like this. But this is still an ongoing investigation, especially since we now have new material from other areas of the Middle Nile. I told you already that the current state of the art is that we consider Nubian sherds as integral parts of the pottery corpora from temple towns. If we look at the numbers of Nubian sherds from Sai Island, we can say that it's a quite small part of the corpus. So I gave you here the numbers from Safwan East. So we have just 3% of the total of the New Kingdom sherds. And if you only count the diagnostic sherds, we have not less than 7%. And on the western sector in Safwan West, it looks quite similar. We have for the diagnostics almost 9%, and for the general total number less than 2%. So really a small proportion. Nevertheless, we had almost 5,000 pieces of Nubian style shirts. So in general, we got a good understanding of the Nubian pottery found in the New Kingdom town of Sai, and I will come back to this quite soon. What you then normally also investigate, of course, apart from fabrics and wares, is of course the vessel types. And again, this is the same stratigraphic unit that I showed you before in Safwan West with the different fabrics. And the majority of our types is this one column in the middle. But in general, you can really say we have 3 clusters of very common types. So it's beer jars, beakers, flower pots, and stands. And on the other hand, it's dishes, bowls, amphora, and jars. And a little bit also seer vessels, the water jars. And last but not least, we also do have Nubian cooking pots. So let's show you some of the most common shapes. They are very, very common for the 18th dynasty. So this is all 18th dynasty material, early to mid 18th dynasty. And for example, those are the beer jars, very early 18th dynasty in date. We mostly have those pinched bases. We have a lot of different beakers, almost all in Nile clay. We have flower pots of various types. We have a large number of pot stands, mostly in Nile clay, but also some Nile clay pot stands. And we have a large amount of storage vessels, seer vessels. So these would be Nile clay seer vessels. And here you would have a nice example of an Egyptian Nile clay imported seer vessel. We also do have a mixed clay that was used for seer vessels. This is all very, very nicely comparable what we find at Elephantine and partly also what we find in Amarna in Egypt. I want to present you one really nice column, the large cellar feature 15 that was burnt somewhere in the 18th dynasty, and this caused that this cellar was abandoned, and we found a lot of almost complete vessels inside this cellar. And you can see here one footed bowl with incised decoration, and these bowls are very common on Sai Island. They are well attested also in Egypt since the Second Intermediate period. They have some predecessors, if you want, already in the Middle Kingdom, but really common in the Second Intermediate period and in the early 18th dynasty. They run all the way to Thutmoside times, and they are really nice shapes with this pie crust rim, like Stuart Tyson Smith calls it, and this wavy line decoration. This is another shot of feature 15, where you can also see during the excavation we found large remains of vessels inside the filling of the cellar. And these are some more shapes with some black rim dishes, some red burnished dishes, the flower pots, those unusual vessels which find parallels at Elephantine, and those squat jars which are clear imitations of Nile clay vessels. Here, more ceramics from this feature. So dishes and plates carinated with a slightly averted rim and with a direct rim. And this is one cooking pot that was found in this feature. If we now go into general aspects about the pottery from Sai Island, I told you already, typical for a settlement, we do have mostly Nile clay, but we also do get some painted wares, and here especially also Nile clay vessels. So what I show you here is are some cases for very, very nicely decorated Nile clay vessels, blue painted Nile clay vessels from the mid-18th dynasty, and a nice pilgrim flask that is also painted. We also do get Nile clay vessels that are decorated. But let's first start with those Nile clay vessels. We have the typical Tutmosite squat jars and other larger jars with the very characteristic monochrome decoration. But we do have a large amount of Nile clay vessels with bichrome decoration. And also this one is a Nile clay. It is clearly imitating a Nile clay vessel, but it's a Nile clay. And I will mention later that we find such a decoration in this bichrome style with those very typical triangular patterns also in other sites in Nubia, for example, at Dukigel, but also at Elephantine. So it really seems to be something very common between the first cataract and the third cataract. We have some blue painted, I told you already, and this is a very, very nice Nile clay ruton with this figural decoration. We also get imports. We get imports from the Mediterranean, from the Levant, and this is all significant if we want to understand the function of Sai. It's a major town of the colonial administration in Nubia. So it is really well embedded in the networks of the Egyptians. So we get Mycenaean imports, we get imports from Cyprus and from the Levant. And we also have oasis imports. And not on the slide is that we have also red lustrous wheelmate ware, so probably from Cyprus, maybe from the Levant. Quite again something that compares very nicely to what we find at Elephantine, for example. What is really interesting is that some of the functional wares, and these are, for example, fish dishes, so those very well-known flat basins with the incised decoration. Here on Sai, we mostly have simple geometric patterns. They occur in the common Nile clay versions, but they were also probably locally made in Nile clay. And this seems to be kind of a question of access to material, and that it at some point in the use life of Sai Island, it was much easier to reproduce such a fish dish than to order it again from Egypt. And this is traceable also for other pottery shapes. I mentioned already the painted material, especially those bichrome painted Nile clay vessels. What we have very common on Sai is are different kinds of bowls, mostly with an outer lip, a carination, and with monochrome decoration, especially hanging like pending triangles, like you can see it here, on a red surface, on a red burnished surface. And this is another very typical pattern, and I will show you a little bit later that this is something that is very, very common in New Kingdom Nubia, and it seems to be something local, something regional. So whether it's really local or regional is really something we are still investigating. If we talk about cooking pots, we can say that we have a lot of the typical Egyptian cooking pots, the whole mouth variation that is very common for the early 18th dynasty. And then this type with the small lip that is more common in the early to mid 18th dynasty and also continues into the late 18th dynasty. And those shapes appear side by side with the Nubian style cooking pots, especially with basketry impression, but partly also with very, very coarse surfaces. Just a short comment. We had a proof of concept made for organic residue analysis, and this was conducted by my colleagues Maxime Rachaud and Philipp Stockhammer from LMU Munich. And they analyzed 6 cooking pots from Sai, 3 Egyptian and 3 Nubian cooking pots. And I won't go into detail, but what is really interesting is that when we look on those different stylistically and optically different pots, we might think that they were also used for different things, which can very well be the case. But in general, as you can see here, the Egyptian and Nubian pots had very, very similar signals. So it's not a clear distinction. And this is probably also what fits very well to our present understanding of this cultural entanglement, that it's more about who was using it in which context and not what pot was it. Yeah. So I will come back to this. This Egyptian pot only had animal fat, whereas we have one Nubian pot that only had plant and fruit signals. But again, the sample is of course too small. It was just a proof of concept. Some words about the Nubian material. So the good thing about our corpus of Nubian pottery from Saya Island is that we really have the complete functional repertoire. We have cooking pots, we have bowls, dishes, storage vessels, and fineware like black-topped ware. And this allows us, of course, to really process the Nubian material in similar ways like the Egyptian material. Nevertheless, the Nubian wares, as I said already, are much more limited in terms of quantities than the Egyptian style material. So we had, for example, from the Western sector, less than 3,500 Nubian shirts, and most of them are cooking ware. Yeah, so I just show you this small statistic to make sure that we do have storage vessels, but they are quite rare. We do have fineware, but it's quite rare. And also decorated, like impressed and incised decoration is also quite rare on site. Most common are the cooking pots. I mentioned them already. We have different types of basketry, and they find very, very good parallels, for example, at Sesame, but also at Elephantine. The incised wares are partly really interesting because they are affiliated a little bit with the Pangrave tradition of hedged decoration. This is something that leads a little bit further towards the north, respectively to the Eastern Desert. And this again shows you that also in the Nubian pottery from Sai, it's not completely homogeneous, but it's quite heterogeneous. Another storage vessel that is very, very typical for the region. I show you our complete vessel that we found in the northern sector of Sai. And here are some fragments that Brigitte Gracienne excavated in the Kerma Cemetery on Sai. We have other forms of closed vessels, basketry and impressed decoration. And the fineware. The fineware is really interesting because we have black-top beakers, but not really the very nice, typical tulip-shaped beakers, but as you can see in the drawing and in the photo, a little bit different. And this is interesting because, of course, from the Kerma Cemetery on Sai, we do have the proper tulip Kerma Classique beakers, but from the town itself, it seems to be a little bit of a variation, probably a little bit later in date, of course. Yeah, and some of our black-topped Nubian ware have the silver band, but others have not. So we do quite often just have a black rim and no silver band. And we also have different finenesses, different versions. Yeah, and last but not least, we also have something that we can call hybrid vessels. These two storage vessels are really interesting because both of them are wheel-made. The fabric looks very Egyptian or Egyptian style, but look at the surface. I tried to indicate this here with the horizontal burnishing and here with vertical burnishing. It's red burnish. And Philippe Roufieux has very nice parallels in Dukigel, and he calls it a Nubian style of surface treatment. And it's probably really something where the two traditions were merging with each other and were creating something new. And something similar might have happened for those cooking pots. The top cooking pot is wheel-made, but it has a red rim and incised decoration, something we know from other sites, for example, in Edfu, in Elephantine, in other places, where they are also called hybrid vessels, in-between vessels, things that are associated a little bit with the Pangrave tradition, but appearing in Egyptian contexts. And this Egyptian cooking pot just got after production, after firing those black lines, which might indicate some incised decoration. So it is also maybe something that is referring a little bit to the incised decoration that we sometimes get on Nubian cooking pots. Yeah, to sum up what I wanted to say about Sai Island, not only the pottery, but of course a lot of other sources very nicely illustrate that Sai Island was a temple town, and as a temple town, it was a major trade hub in New Kingdom Nubia. It was an administrative center. There was a temple, so it also had religious functions and aspects. But it also had local roots in the Kerma culture. We really do have a presence of Nubian pottery and also of this exchange of the two traditions. Yeah, so we have dealt now with this urban context for New Kingdom Nubia, but what is happening in the hinterland? So let's now move to the Moors concession. And we will go to Attab West. Attab is the very southern district of our concession. You can see here the black dot. This is where I will lead you now. We will talk about the site Attab West 001, which is a small 18th dynasty domestic site. Before we go there, I just want to mention that in this district, in Attab and also a little bit in Guinness, we had a number of stone huts, also fortifications, stone walls, mud brick buildings that are associated both with early 18th dynasty Egyptian pottery and Kerma Classique ceramics. It is really difficult to kind of say such sites are Egyptian or such sites are Kerma. In the 1970s, when André Villard mapped and surveyed this region, he made a clear classification. He divided those sites into Kerma or in New Kingdom. And in our project, we try to say, hey, let's really think about what happened at those sites. Let's try to reconstruct the lived experiences of the occupants as much as possible. And let's also consider that those settlements are probably seasonal settlements, non-permanent settlements, that they are associated with desert routes, with ancient riverscapes. And this is, of course, something different to what we just have seen with the city context of Sai Island. Yeah, but our site that we will now, that I will now briefly introduce is visible here. It's Attab West 001. You can also see a picture when we started excavation. So it was a very shallow mound. And we think it was probably located on a former island in the 18th dynasty. We started to excavate here because the surface was completely covered with schist stone and with a lot of stone tools and with pottery. And the surface pottery was clearly early to mid 18th dynasty, mostly wheel-made Egyptian style pottery, and this is why we wanted to investigate it. When we started to excavate in the northern part of the site, we found various phases of use and fill, but no standing architecture. So what we quickly realized, we have a domestic rubbish hill, a deposit, including mud bricks. So somewhere mud brick building structures must have originally stood somewhere, but we only found loose mud bricks in rubbish deposits. We also had ashes spots, fireplaces, etc. So here you can see it better. This was the trench I just showed you that we started to excavate in 2022. And in 2023, we opened the larger area and we excavated what we thought was a mound. But this mound was actually just a huge accumulation of a midden, like of trash deposits, with a lot of complete vessels and almost complete vessels. So you can see here some pottery, some mud bricks, some animal bones. So it was a really dense accumulation. In the end, we also had some storage pits, some circular pits. So we still think that it was maybe with some, we also had some post holes in some areas. So there were probably some ephemeral architectural features, but I will come back to this also in a little bit. I told you already the surface material was 18th dynasty. So we were quite sure this is an 18th dynasty site. What we were also sure once we started excavating is that it has something to do with gold working, with quartz crushing. So we had this very large millstone, grindstone that is very typical for the quartz crushing. We had a lot of quartz flakes on the site and in the surroundings, pounders to crush the quartz. And thanks to the pottery, we can date the main use of the site to the Tutmosid period, which is quite interesting, and it's really contemporaneous to Sai Island. We had this nice kochel very eroded, maybe coming from a Kerma site, maybe directly coming from Egypt, difficult to say. We had net weights, very similar to what we had on Sai Island. Clay weights, a number of clay weights. They also find parallels on clay on Sai. And then we had a large amount of pottery that is, again, similar to Sai, but partly also different. It also finds parallels at sites in the periphery of Amara West, and Anna Stevens and Anna Garnett published two of those sites that fit very well, also in terms of archaeological remains and especially the pottery. Yeah, so the pottery from Attab West 001 is, of course, a limited corpus. It is nothing compared to Sai Island. But nevertheless, we had a large amount of almost complete vessels. So this was really interesting. We, again, processed the material with standard ceramic procedures, but also with scientific analysis, similar to what we did on Sai. I just gave you here the numbers, especially to highlight that in our small trench, we first excavated in 2022. We only had 1,000 shirts. In the next year, we had 10 times as much material. So really, there was more to say after we had the complete material on the table. What is really interesting, and please remember what I told you about Sai, that in Sai, the percentage of the Nubian material is very limited. In the first year, we had 33% of the total Nubian shirts. In the second year, we had 20% of the total Nubian shirts. So it's definitely a clear difference. The Egyptian material is very, very similar, but we have a considerably higher amount of Nubian handmade wares than in Sai. What is also really intriguing is that we do have evidence for locally produced wheel-made pottery. We have wasters and overfired pottery sherds of wheel-made material. And my most beloved piece is what you can see here. It's a very ugly amphora, but it's a very nice amphora. It's a Nile clay amphora. Look at the thickness of its wall. So it's very thick. It's very uneven. The handle is probably really made by someone who, was not used to do handles. And this is, of course, at the moment very hypothetical, but it's very tempting to assume that maybe a Nubian potter was trained by an Egyptian potter or just saw one of the imported amphoras and wanted to imitate it. It's an amazing piece, and you could tell a whole story just about it. Unfortunately, our chemical and archaeometric analysis is still pending, but then we can hopefully say a little bit more about the origin of the raw material of this piece. I'm personally convinced it's super local, but you never know. Remember what I told you about Sai, that we had mostly beer jars, beakers, flower pots, etc., etc. It's quite interesting if we look at the most common pottery types from Attab West 001, that we have a large amount of open shapes of dishes and plates and bowls. This also holds true for Nubian style bowls and Egyptian dishes, plates and bowls. Of course, we also, and this is the complete trench one, and this is a certain context where you can see we also have amphora. We also have imported amphora from the Levant. We have amphora from Egypt, and we have jars imported from Egypt. We do have beer jars, we have seers, but the majority are really open shapes, which is quite interesting. But let's briefly go through some of the common types. We have seer vessels, Nile clay seers that are very, very similar to Sai Island. This is one in a very nice, intriguing context of what seems to be a storage pit. Then we have this Mal sea, imported seer from Lower Egypt, but we know Mal sea vessels, of course, from the Kerma cemeteries. We have it also on Sai Island, so this might be an old piece that was reused at the site, but it could also be still in use in the early to mid 18th dynasty. This is in general not a problem. They are just more common in the earlier phases. We do have our painted mild clay vessels, very similar to what we just saw on Sai. We have beakers and beer jars, also very similar to what we have on Sai. And we have a huge amount of bowls and dishes. And these are actually, again, very, very similar to what we have on Sai. Just remember what I showed you from feature 15. So we have various bowls and dishes, especially with small ring bases, with carination with an outer lip, carination with a direct lip. Common shapes we have on Sai, on Elephantine, at the typical early 18th dynasty to mid 18th dynasty settlement sites. And we also get decoration on Nile clay bowls, and this should remind you of what we've seen from Sai. We have those pending triangles, and we have also some linear features. And what is very common at Attab West 001 is a white slipped carinated bowls with monochrome decoration, this brownish decoration on the white surface. And these white dishes with a monochrome decoration are actually very common or well attested in Lower Nubia, especially at Askut, recently published by Stuart Tyson Smith. And the Lower Nubian parallels are a little bit better and closer than what we have on Sai. On Sai, I do have some few fragments of white slipped and monochrome, but more common is red slipped monochrome painted. And it seems to be that in Lower Nubia, it's a little bit more common. So a very, very interesting feature. And just to mention that what I showed you before with the Nile clay bichrome painted jars is also well attested in Askut and in general in other sites in Lower Nubia. The cooking pots at Attab West 001 are again very similar to Sai Island. We do have a more more evidence for those whole mouth early 18th dynasty cooking pots, because the site seems to be especially early 18th dynasty and then until mid 18th dynasty. So this might be a little bit of a diachronic or chronological aspect. But we also do get those common cooking pots that we saw on Sai, but most of the rims are not really an outer lip like we find it in the later 18th dynasty, like we saw it on Sai. So this is a chronological feature, as I said. And again, the Egyptian material appears side by side with the Nubian pots. And if you put it really next to each other, you can also see how the Egyptian pots are really closely in shape to those Nubian pots. And this is very unlikely to be a coincidence. One remarkable vessel is this pot. You know it already from the poster of this lecture. It's a pot that we reconstructed out of many sherds, as you can see on the photo. And I call it a hybrid cooking pot. Well, why do I do this? Look at this carination where we do have a lot of rope impressions. And you can also see it on the photo. This is a clear indication of Egyptian way of production, where you have a kind of a juncture of the pot, like this pot was produced in two junctures. The upper part is wheel made, and this lower part is maybe made in coiling, maybe in a basket or in another mold. But they also used the ropes to keep it together during drying. And the rim is where, like, so we have an Egyptian kind of manufacturing. Then we have an Egyptian style of fabric. It's very sandy. It's very typical what we find in other cooking pots. It's maybe a bit peculiar, but in general, it's very comparable. But then we do have this wavy line of incise decoration. This is something we find also on Egyptian pots, but it's more common on Nubian pots. And then the final thing that is more common on Nubian pots are those finger pinches on the rim pinches. They are very typical on Kerma Classique pottery. They are very common at the side. And here we have something where obviously those two traditions are merging with each other. What is interesting is that we had an analysis of the residues of this pot, and I should probably not call it cooking pot, because now we know it was used to process dairy products, milk, butter, or cheese from cattle, sheep, or goat. At the moment, we cannot differentiate this, but so it's a unique pot. We have only this single example, and we have a very, very specific type of use, which is really interesting. The Nubian ceramics from Attab West 001 have storage vessels. They have more fine Kerma Classique black-topped examples, partly very wind-worn, as you can see here. And they have various cups and open dishes. So similar to what I said already in Sai, we have black-topped cups. We have dishes and cups with basketry impressions. And we find parallels for this in urban contexts like in Sai and Sesebe, Nubia. We find it also in cities like Elephantine in Egypt. But most importantly, we also have it in Kerma Classique cemeteries, like in the cemetery we excavated just across the river in Guinness East. Most common is, of course, the coarse cooking, where, again, very, very similar to what we have seen for Sai, partly with some repair holes and mostly with basketry impression. The oral results, the organic residue analysis, was done by Julie Dunn and her team at the University of Bristol. We, again, just had a proof of concept. She managed to have a recovery rate of 50%. So I sent in 12 samples, and she could get results out of 6. And they included the hybrid cooking pot. And otherwise, we have Nubian and Egyptian cooking pots. And they also are kind of not completely uniform, but they show similar pictures. The hybrid one is the one with the milk, butter, cheese thing. And we have one Nubian that is only used with, or where we only have plants, very similar to what we have seen on Sai already. So there seems to be a small differentiation, but not a clear shape equals content and use. I will skip this out of time reasons. I'm almost there. So about the function of Attab West 001, we are still working on the complete material, but at the moment we really think it's maybe something like an open space market with some storage areas, with pits, and presumably also somewhere the mud brick buildings, because we had mud bricks, so there must have been some structure somewhere. We can trace activities like fishing, weighing, different things, pottery production. This all fits very well to a marketplace. The pottery is in general very, very similar to Sai, but there are much more Nubian wares and mostly cooking ware. This is something that was also the case in Sai, but here it's even more pronounced. And so maybe it was really some kind of meeting point where expeditions that were going to gold mine in the desert really stopped by, got some equipment, something like this. Yeah, so this is at the moment still a kind of a very loose narrative, but with all its parallels to the site close to Amara, to R18, where Anna Stevens and Anna Garnett proposed that this site, this 2R18 site, shows, I quote, the close sharing of space and activities between Egyptians and Nubians. This is something that we also see here. Yeah? In terms of quantities, it's still the majority is Egyptian style, but we have such a large amount of Nubian style material that we really think this probably reflects a mixed community using this site. I show you this digital elevation model with our trenches for several reasons. First of all, I want to point out that it was probably a seasonal island because we have this paleo channel in the north. And then I hope you can see it a little bit where my mouse is. This is actually the structure that Villar excavated at the site in the 1970s. It was a mud brick building with a fireplace. And if you look at it, it was located at the bottom of such a mound. And we excavated at top of a mound. So I'm really looking forward when the situation is hopefully better soon, that we can go back to our concession and continue with the investigation of this site, because it still holds a lot of questions. We didn't relocate locate the pottery kilns. We really have to have so many open questions that we should address with work in the field. And with this, I would like to come to a sort of an outlook and also a small summary. For me, those hybrid pots that we see both inside, but also at our rural place in the hinterland, these are really something we should consider as very local and very temporal. And I really think the pot that I showed you with, which was used for milk, cheese, butter, something like this, nicely illustrates that it is most probably more significant what kind of social practices, what actual things were done with this pot, rather than aspects of cultural identity. In general, we have this complex mixture of lifestyles, which transformed both the indigenous and the colonial society. And this resulted in this new diversity, which shaped New Kingdom Nubia in general. And we should really talk about multiple New Kingdom Nubias. So we do have both in Sai and in Attab a changing set of very well attested forms and types that nevertheless exhibit individual local properties. It holds true for Sai as well as for Attab. Particular when it comes to preferences for specific vessels, for the treatment of rims or surfaces, and for the choice of fabrics. So there are variations between urban and rural, of course. So it's a difference if you have a city or a small seasonal market. But there are also variations between sites of the same category, like Sai Island, Sesebe, Askut, Dukigel, etc. And this clear contrast that is especially visible by the amount of Nubian material between the urban trade hub like Sai and the seasonal marketplace in its hinterland, like Attab West 001, is of course significant. It also illustrates that despite this contrast, the sites are really interconnected and linked to each other, and they are linked, of course, not because of the pottery, but because of the people that are using it. And if we really take this serious, then we will hopefully come to a better understanding of very complex or very dynamic social practices in colonial Nubia. And with this, I would like to thank you for your kind attention. And I'm very grateful to all of our Sudanese colleagues who are facing so difficult times at the moment, to NCAM and to all the authorities, especially to our Inspector Huda, who has worked with us all those years, to our local workmen, and of course to all of my team members. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention again.